Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the most disappointing fantasy books that I have read in the last kind of year and a half or so. By disappointing, I mean maybe I had kind of very high expectations and then they kind of fell flat, or I really liked the sound of the plot and again it just didn't really work for me. So let's jump right in. I think I have 10 books that I'm going to talk about. They're in no particular order, so I'm just going to kick right off. The first one is The Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. It's funny because I really enjoyed the overall series and I gave the second book 4 stars and then I think I gave the third book 4 stars as well. But the first book as an entryway into the world, it didn't really gel with me. I mean, I read it in a couple of days, which is pretty good, but I think the harshness of the characters so early on the series was maybe a bit too much for me, and the brutality of the world, which is interesting because I love grimdark and I love really dark fantasy, but I don't know, like there were moments where I felt like things were happening just for shock value, and I really don't like that. Sometimes I didn't really feel like it added much to the story or even to the characters, and it was just there to cause discomfort. I don't mind discomfort, but it has to have a purpose and it has to have a reason. So I found it a little bit disappointing, but then I have to say Mark Lawrence brought it back for me in the next 2 books in the series. The next book is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I really did not like that book. I don't understand why it gets so much hype. I think part of the problem for me was that I just didn't gel with her writing style, which is entirely personal preference. But the relationship between the main female protagonist and then the kind of love interest, it was a really toxic relationship, and I don't understand why people were rooting for these 2 characters. See what I did there? Uprooted, rooting for these 2 characters. It felt like quite an abusive relationship, and it was not enjoyable to read. One of the few books that I ended up skim reading through. I didn't DNF it. I very rarely DNF books. I ended up just skim reading to the end and I just wanted it to be over. As a result of that, I'm not sure if I'm going to read more of Naomi Novik's books. I think a big part of it is that her writing style is just not for me. I do have Spinning Silver. A couple of people have told me that I'll probably like that a lot better, so maybe at some point I'll read it, but it's not super high up my list. The next one is a YA fantasy romance series, and that is the Folk of the Air Trilogy by Holly Black. Another series I don't understand why people like it so much. Again, I thought the relationship was super abusive. I really did not like any of the characters. Like the main female protagonist and then the love interest were both, I mean, the female protagonist was annoying, and then the male love interest was, I don't know, he was just your typical, like he kind of embodied a lot of the typical tropes that you see in YA fantasy romance, and I just did not like it. Thing is, I can't believe I actually read the trilogy. I think I was hoping that it would get better because I'd heard so many good things about it, but it massively fell flat for me. The next series is the Shadow and Bone Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. It's funny because I have a very interesting relationship with Leigh Bardugo's books. The Six of Crows duology is one of my favorite duologies, series, whatever you want to call it, ever, and I love the characters that she has in there. And then the Grisha trilogy or Shadow and Bone trilogy, again, it was just full of a lot of the same boring tropes, and I felt like I was rereading a lot of the same stuff that I've read in so much fantasy. And Alina is just really stupid sometimes, and like, I don't think there's anything wrong with characters making dumb mistakes, because in reality we all do, but when it gets to a point where you're just making like dumb mistake after dumb mistake, it's like, what are you doing? And like, are you just an idiot, or has the author just not written you particularly well? And I don't think the author wrote her particularly well. I think the other thing is that because I read Six of Crows first, my expectations of that were so high. I rated those books 4.5 and 5 stars respectively. And so then going into Shadow and Bone, it was just such a disappointment. And I actually recently unhauled that trilogy because I don't think I will ever read it again. The next book, so this isn't a series, it's just a kind of standalone within a broader universe, is Mistborn: A Secret History by Brandon Sanderson. So you're supposed to read that book after Mistborn Era 2, which is how I read it, and I hated that it showed everything that was happening behind the scenes. It really frustrated me, actually. I didn't like the way that it was written. I didn't like that it kind of showed us how the sausage was being made. I feel like it undermined a lot of the amazing plot work that Brandon Sanderson did in Era 1, and then Era 2 I didn't like as much, but I still found it enjoyable. It was just unnecessary. I don't think that book necessarily enriches your experience of the world, and so the question I asked myself is, why is it there? I rated that, I think, like 2.5 or 3 stars, and that's like my lowest rated Brandon Sanderson book. The next one is the From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I had such high hopes for this fantasy romance series. I love a good fantasy romance as much as the next person, but this one is shocking. The dialogue is terrible. The characters are boring. So much info dumping. It was a slog. Reading the third book in particular was really difficult for me. There was very few things redeemable about the book. The only thing that is redeemable is one character who goes by the name of Kieran, and I would happily read a book that is just about him and it's just not about any of the kind of main characters that we currently follow in the series. It's so bad that I'm not going to continue on with the rest of the series because it really pissed me off. Feel so annoyed that I wasted my time reading it. Next one is Tagana by Guy Gabriel Kay. I had really high expectations going into this book because I know that Guy Gabriel Kay worked with Christopher Tolkien. I really loved the kind of premise behind Tagana. I also really loved the first 200 pages. And then for some reason, I don't know what changed, but something was just not gelling with me. And I did end up reading to the end and I quite liked the ending, but the way that he was telling the story just didn't work for me. Which is weird because the first like 200 pages did. I feel like maybe it was one of those books that didn't need to be as long as it was. Maybe that's why I didn't like it. And that was my first Guy Gabriel Kay book that I read. And I'm still adamant that I'm going to give more a go because I've heard really great things about some of his other ones, especially Lines of Al Rassan, which I'm going to pick up soon. Tagana for me, it was a disappointment. Like, it's so highly rated by so many people, but it just didn't, especially by people whose opinions that I really respect. And yeah, it didn't work for me. So that was annoying. We're down to 2 more. These are also fantasy romance books. So the next one is Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. Look, I enjoyed Throne of Glass. I also enjoy ACOTAR, but Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas was boring. Characters were annoying. Romance wasn't even that good. Didn't buy into it at all. Lots of info dumping. Pacing was off. It's a very big book. It does not need to be that big. I also unhauled that recently. I will give the second book in the series, which I think is coming out in a couple of months, a go because there was a twist at the end of book 1 that kind of saved it for me. If she goes in the direction that I suspect she's going in, she might turn this series around for me, but otherwise I did not like it. And the last one is Graceling by Kristen Crishaw. This is a very beloved series by people who like fantasy romance. Again, I didn't really have a problem with the characters. I thought the characters were okay. I think the setting was okay. I think the plot was okay. Like, this is the thing. It was a disappointment because it was just okay. I was hoping that I was going to love it. Again, I feel like maybe I had too high expectations going into the series, which isn't her fault necessarily, but it was meh, and I'm not going to continue on with the series. Oh, that was good. So that's it. Those are my biggest disappointments in fantasy to date. Let me know if you agree with any of these books or if there's any books that you've found particularly disappointing in the last couple of years. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video. I hope you have a lovely day and stay safe, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye, everybody.